Anyway, good morning, Jeremy and Joe. Hey, how are you? Give us a call. On Hendrickson.
Yeah, because he's interesting.
He is. I mean, listen.
He replaces Max Crosby as the. I would love to get Myles Garrett or blank. It was Max Crosby. Now it's going to be Hendrickson, I think.
Yeah. He's more reasonable, right? He's going to want a new contract. He has been given permission to seek a trade instead of asking for a trade.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It all comes down conceptually to what you want the Bills to do. And we're going to talk to Mike Giannetti of Spot Trek coming up at 7:30 about like the cap situation. What do you want them to do? I know what I want them to do. I want them to go in on a level that's never been gone in on before. Mm-hmm. I want them to burn the bridges behind them. Absolutely go in on everything and every contract, that doesn't mean that they extend every one of their own guys.
Mm-hmm.
It means don't tell me for a second they don't have the cap to pay player X. Of course they do. Make it happen.
Right.
Find a way. Redo deals, push as much money, live life like the Eagles. The Eagles did it. The Eagles model. Like I'm also getting a little obsessed about models here, right? The Eagles win the Super Bowl, Joe, and along the way, they just crash everybody with their front four. Oh, wow. Look at that. How about Howie Roseman? What a genius. I ask you, go to Spot Track's page and take a look at the Eagles roster and what they have done. Mm-hmm. The Eagles model, it's so much about the Eagles model is a headline about how they win with defense. You know what they do? They pay for offense and draft their defense. That's the model.
Yeah.
Of their biggest contracts, they're all on the offensive side of the ball. Everybody. They pay everybody.
Mm-hmm. Is that still true? They paid that Zach Bond, the linebacker, recently, but that's still probably not top four for them.
Here are their top contracts. Bond just got into that mix.
Okay.
Hurts, Brown, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Darius Slay, who they just released.
They released him, yeah.
Goddard, Devonta Smith. There's Bryce Huff. Barkley, Landon Dickerson. Top 10, I've got 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10.
8 out of the 10 biggest contracts of the Eagles are on the offensive side of the ball, including a $50 million quarterback.
Right.
Tell me about the Eagles model. I'm listening. You can spend every draft pick you want on your defense and just pay for offense. Just go ahead and do that. The Eagles pay 2 receivers big money, Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown.
Yeah. Meanwhile, if you look at their draft picks in recent years, this is very true what you're saying, because their first 3 picks last year went corner, safety, defensive end. The year before that, it went defensive line, edge, outside linebacker. The year before that, it went defensive tackle, offensive line, linebacker. So they've made 2 day 1 or day 2 picks in the last 3 years on offense, and they were both offensive linemen. So the last skill position player they picked like that was Devonta Smith, which they did now 4 years ago.
Right, which was a very high pick, and they took him and added him to A.J. Brown, who they, of course, traded for. So here are the Bills.
Is that on the same day? Did they do that on the same day? Smith doesn't predate Brown. They trade for Brown on draft day, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And Vrabel loses his mind with the camera in the room. So that was one of the COVID drafts. Maybe it's the same draft even. But no, you're right. They did it with Smith, and they hit on the pick, and we're good. We don't have to do that again for as long as Brown stays healthy. We don't have to do that again for 5 years at least.
Yeah, that's where I get to. What should I be thinking of? Because a common refrain about what they should do is they had a good offense last year. Should they run it back? Should they run it back?
The Eagles or the Bills?
The Bills. They had a great offense. Just run it back.
I don't think they should completely run it back. Can they run it back 90%? Run it back? Because I'm going to be on this point strong all offseason that they were second in the league in scoring, but they got some help with not. What was part of the reason they got to second in the league in scoring? One was they didn't turn the ball over at a historic rate, number 1 in the league in that, and something that Sal's pointed out a lot when talking about their special teams, they had the best average drive start in the NFL last year.
Turnovers from the defense?
Because their defense turned it over. You want to include that Codrington was one of the top returners in the league, go ahead. But returners or turnovers on defense helped that too. So you never gave away possessions by turning the ball over, and your average drive start was better. I'm not saying that is the only reason they were number 2, but it could be the difference between being like number 6 and number 2, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe number 5 and number 2. So, what the Bills' standard should be is I don't want to just accept, I'll get a little regression on both of those categories, and if I'm the 6th best offense in the league next year, I'm okay with that. You've been strong on this too, that I am not okay with them just accepting like being the 6th best offense in football. They were 2nd last year. I want them to be 2nd again. And if I'm going to get regression in some other areas, I need to be better somewhere else. And the only place to really look for that is, I think, downfield speed and outside wide receiver.
Yeah, the idea of standing pat or running it back offensively for the Bills, I just feel like it might be a little strong to say a loser mentality, but McDermott will say stuff like this. You get to the offseason, you kind of tear it down and build it back up. Like, what do we got? What can we do better? How can we improve? The Bills had an amazing offense and decided that they wanted to be a yak-based offense instead of the offense that they had in the early portion of Josh Allen's breakout. And they did it.
Yeah.
So they didn't sit on their hands then. They made big changes, and they drafted Kincaid. And, agree or disagree, like they're always trying to find ways to improve. And the idea of running it back and just bringing back the same old offense, Joe, is anybody else in the NFL doing that? Who else is just running it back? What are the Chiefs going to do? The Chiefs are going to try and overhaul their offensive line again, probably get help on the offensive line. There might be only one team in the league that doesn't, and is that Philadelphia? Because they're re-upping everybody and Sure.
They're just paying everybody.
Baltimore went 14-2. They were the 1 seed. Did they run it back? They got Derrick Henry. And they didn't win. But Baltimore did not run it back. Baltimore said, let's get a freak show. We got to get better. We were awesome, and we have to be better. And I think the Bills should be living in that space. They were awesome. And, of course, they should want to be better because every time you hit an offseason as a team on the top, other teams are trying to come for you. And Josh Allen, of course, is amazing. Maybe the best quarterback in football right now. I don't like this I don't like this space we live in where we are now kind of getting used to, hey, he's amazing. He doesn't need help. He doesn't need anybody special out there with him. Look how good the offense was last year. They ran the ball amazingly with a great offensive line. Cook had a great year. By the way, he's immediately being cast aside by a good chunk of fans. Not everybody, of course. But Josh is so good, he's somehow convinced people that they'd be fine if they don't have anybody good. They'd be fine if they just have guys.
Yeah. I think maybe that's feels true to a lot of people right now because you just kind of did see it to some extent. They tore it down, and the expectation of the offense was, all right, we're about to see what the floor is. We don't really know what the floor is yet because they've had Diggs and they've had an elite, at times, you had to go back a couple years, but there was times where they had an elite receiving core. Like, all right, now let's see what it really looks like when it's torn down to the studs. And then it went the way that it did. So that might feel like that's the floor of the offense. And I just feel like there's not going to be a much, they're going to bottom out. If Allen is their quarterback, they're not going to be one of the worst offenses in football ever, or even maybe middle of the pack. But that doesn't mean you can't be better, and that doesn't mean you can't be worse than you were last year on offense, which, again, was good. It was great. They set the record for touchdowns in a season for the Buffalo Bills. So I can understand why someone would think I don't need to go all out and go trade for DK Metcalf and pay him $30 million a year. I can just do these modest move here, modest move there. Let me just sign Josh Palmer. That's me trying to get better. Let me sign Josh Palmer. I just don't have to go nuts because Allen is this good, and I've got all these other pieces out. My line is amazing. I've got a good run game, and that should be enough. And I can kind of focus on the defense. I can get to that standpoint. It's not going to be my preferred outcome, though, because I want to see them go all out and go get a Metcalf and be as good as you could be number one. I think you could be number one with this offense, and I would not want them to settle for just being like third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
I guess what I would land on with that is, how is that any different than what they have done? They have spent and poured assets into the defense. This is not a team that's been the Bengals. Right. They have outspent on defense routinely. The defense has been more expensive than the offense regularly with this team. What's different? They had a draft where they drafted defensive ends in the first and second round, and then the next year spent $120 million on a defensive end. And they draft in the secondary all the time. They've gone first-round picks twice in the secondary. I'm not mad about that. This idea that, oh, no, you've got to make sure you build your defense. I don't think they're ever going to stop. I guess it comes down to 2 years in a row they went out and drafted pass catchers.
And I mean, if you go, you can set the bar wherever you want. Their last 6 first and second round picks, 5 of them are on offense. So they have... For 3 years now, they have started to move the meter back the other way. Problem is, one of those is a running back, by the way, but still.
Yeah, one of those running back. And the previous, however many picks on the offense were running backs.
Right.
There's a lot of running backs.
But since they drafted James Cook in the second round, it's tight end, offensive lineman, and it's wide receiver. So, but that's the thing, right? I only got 1 receiver pick, and I've got a tight end pick that just still is confusing, and we haven't seen the fruits of, and then it's a guard. So I want to give them a little credit for not just strictly drafting defense, but it hasn't been ideal for what I'd want them to do, especially at the receiver position. So I don't know, like running it back to me is more about the identity of the offense, isn't it? Than even just the players. It's, do we want to run the ball as much as we did? Do we want to be built around the yak of the offense? Do we want to run a lot of screens? Do we want Shakir to be a 100-target player? Because to me, unless you trade for Metcalf, any move they make this summer, am I right thinking the identity of the offense is going to be the exact same, just with a couple of different pieces?
Yeah, I think so. Right?
They're not going back to airing it out. Brandon Beane airing it out to, compared to what they were before. They still throw the ball a lot. But Beane, I heard on Pat McAfee a couple weeks ago, he said that he agreed with one criticism that was true of them for the first few years of Allen being an elite quarterback, which is they weren't, you've heard this before, they weren't built for Buffalo. That they would get to the playoffs and that they would get manhandled, and they weren't capable of running the ball, and they didn't have that other card to play. And
what side of the ball got manhandled, though? Like, let's be real about that. What side got manhandled?
It was the defense,
right? The defense,
and he could have been talking more about the defense, but I don't know. The way the question was framed, it was more about the offense. So I wonder what he thinks of what they are now versus what they were before. I mean, I'm sure in a perfect world he'd like to marry the two together, and maybe that's all we're talking about. But he sounded like someone that's not going to want to ever be built again, where his offensive line is middle to below average, and the receivers are elite, but they can't run the ball. They can't, do all this other stuff.
I don't know. What's the path forward for them? They're right on the edge,
The path forward for them is most likely going to be go spend this summer. Like what I'm betting they're going to do. They're going to make one modest receiver move somewhere, and then they're going to go all out. They're going to do defensive stuff. Like they are going to,
sure, as they should.
They're going to sign a Josh Sweat, or they're going to trade for a Garrett or a Hendrickson. They're going to use their first round pick on defense. Like their defense, I think, is going to look. That's their path forward. Their path forward, I'm almost positive, is going to be the defense looks completely different.
Well, I teased going to the break, and I'll tell you what the answer is here. Bill Barnwell, ESPN, teams that should trade for Metcalf, best fits, and on and on. He broke down what a Metcalf new deal would look like. Like, let's give him a new deal. All right, how about 4 years, 128 with 75 guaranteed?
It's a little over 30.
Yes.
Okay.
You know his cap hit this year would be
on that contract.
Yes.
Would it be like 14?
It depends. He has a couple different ways to break it down, but Metcalf on a deal, he's got it 4 years, 128, and then he goes on to talk about where he would fit. What could they get for him? He thinks not that much. You're not getting a first and a third. Like Diggs got a first. He was entering his age 27 season.
Yep.
Metcalf has not been a big. He's not a true number one producer. He is very good at what he does. And he goes on to get right to the Bills. All right, the Bills. What should they offer? And he suggests Keon Coleman and says it's probably a little too much.
Coleman is too much?
Yes. If Schneider asked for Coleman as part of a return, a 1-for-1 would be weighed too heavily toward the Seahawks. But Coleman and a day 3 pick might be fair value. So Bill Barnwell says Coleman and a day 3 pick.
I understand why he would say that is too much because it's money, right? Money is going to be a big factor here. You're getting $30 million for the player you're acquiring, and the other team is getting the rookie contract. But I mean, come on, I don't know. That's too much. One player is provably great, and the other one, like at best, I'm at a maybe right now.
It would be very odd for them to give up on Coleman. I can't quite square the idea of them trading him with what they've said about him. The fact that they've said all that about him publicly almost means that they've lessened his value, right? Like, let's say that the Seahawks would have made that call, which, by the way, an interesting part of this, if you're talking about a Metcalf and Coleman trade package, which I don't really need to do that. I'm not giving up on Keon Coleman yet.
Well, if you trade for Metcalf, how much is Keon Coleman playing?
Plenty. The answer is Mac Hollins stops playing so much, which, all
right. But what was Coleman? You're changing Coleman's role then, which I'm good with. Like
why am I changing Coleman's role? He can play on the outside.
He led the league in percentage of his targets being go routes last year. Those are now all Metcalf's. They should be at least.
Maybe.
So he's not running straight routes anymore. He's doing underneath stuff. He's maybe lining up in the slot a little bit more often.
Sure, Metcalf's going to run in-breaking routes. Metcalf runs a lot of different stuff. The criticism coming out was he doesn't run the full route tree, but he runs enough. But you could have Coleman and Metcalf for sure. They're not similar players. Coleman's been very good against zone. Metcalf's very good against man. So you do have different skill sets, despite them maybe being similarly sized. But anyway, just to this point, if they were going to trade I was starting to get to the interesting thing. Think back to the Seattle game. Bills, they played Seattle this year.
Yeah.
What happened in that game?
Coleman, was it his best game of the year?
It might have been his best game. Coleman was great.
He bodied Tariq Woolen.
And what did Metcalf do?
He
didn't play.
Okay, that's why. I'm like, why can't I remember him? Yeah, he didn't play. He didn't play?
Right, he didn't play. Might
Okay.
be one of the reasons the Seahawks offense was really rough that day, because what does Metcalf do? Metcalf is, as much as Bean wants to say that they were better when Amari Cooper was on the field because defenses pay attention, Metcalf is a gravitational source. Defenses are going to rotate that way. Defenses are going to bracket him and cover him. And if you want to talk about a player that is going to go in and maybe he gets 80 targets, I don't know what the answer is or how many catches he gets, but if Bills fans saw Metcalf play against the Bills, maybe there'd be even more of a push to get him. But I forget who it is. It might be Kevin Cole. Somebody tracks how often teams trade for a player after that player had a great game against them, and or sign a guy. Oh, this guy had a huge game against the Giants, and then the Giants signed him. Coleman was very, very good against Seattle. So if you are the GM in Seattle and you think, all right, let's talk trade, I might take Coleman because I would immediately get younger, cheaper, and my fans might be impressed. They might think that guy's pretty good, and I might have thought that guy's pretty good too. So Barnwell said Coleman and a day 3 pick, and I'm just not sure. I don't know what the right pick is. I don't know what the right package is. I know I'm interested in the whole thing, though. I think it's awesome. It's a great offseason conversation, Metcalf.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I am maybe a little lower than on Coleman for this because I just think he becomes my Gabe Davis then, doesn't he? If he's on the team and I've figured out a way to trade for Metcalf without using him. Like that's the part I'm trying to figure out, is like him coexisting with another big receiver move, especially one that is Like, the last time there was a chart from Matt Harmon on Metcalf, reception perception, 19.6% of his routes were the go route, which was more than any other route except the slant. And Coleman last year, like comparing that to his number, he and Metcalf are two of like the top 5 receivers in the league at passes over 20 yards down the field, which we've said, Allen wants that, right? Allen wants to chuck the ball deep. So I can have 2 of those. I guess that's the answer then, right? Allen wants to chuck the ball deep. I'm giving him 2 guys now that he can do that with that do it in very different ways.
Okay.
Metcalf is running by guys. Coleman is, I just got to chuck it up and hope he comes down with it.
Alternatively, maybe you'd have somebody that's not Keon Coleman running those routes because now you have someone that is good at them. And that's Metcalf. Someone that when he runs it, they send 2 defenders toward him. Because that's another thing about Coleman is he faced single coverage all the time. Defensive coordinators were not afraid. They did not send a second defender over there against Keon Coleman. And maybe as he gets better and better, he'll earn more double teams, but Metcalf gets double teamed. We got to play some of the highlights from Nico Tamurian, who was on with Sally yesterday, who he covers the Seahawks, went all in on Metcalf about how he's a good teammate and how he's probably underrated and he's drawing double teams all the time and whatever. Is he the perfect idea? I don't know about perfect. It's a good idea. And that Coleman trade that Barnwell floated, I mean, it's definitely juicy.